Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Minister Louis Farrakhan.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, the one God to whom all praise is due, the Lord of the worlds, and in the name of his true servant and last messenger, our beloved leader, teacher, and guide, the messenger of Allah, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, I greet you, my beloved brothers and sisters, students, with the greeting words of peace in the Arabic language. Assalamu alaikum. To those of you who are unfamiliar with those words, they mean in English, peace be unto you. It's a great honor and privilege for me to have been invited to share this evening with you. I realize that there has been some slight controversy over my appearance here. But I say to the students, a college should be able to listen freely to ideas that are not necessarily our own. And with the intelligence that we have, we should be able to sift those ideas and determine what is good for ourselves. As black people in this country, we need to be exposed to ideas that will uplift, motivate, stimulate us as a people to do things for ourselves that would make us respected by the people and nations of the earth. We need to be exposed to ideas that inspire us to do for ourselves. As a people, we have too long been dependent on Caucasians for everything of necessity: food, clothing, shelter, jobs, education. This is not the way for a people to gain self-respect or the respect of others. As an intelligent people, we must now break this cycle of just being consumers, and we must begin to produce the things that we consume. As students in this university, we would hope that you would apply yourselves to knowledge, not graduating from this institution, going out into the world, seeking a job, but graduating from this institution, going out into the world to produce a job for yourself and your people. As you know, we live in a diminishing economy, and our population is ever increasing. And it is going to be more and more difficult for America to give jobs to her own millions of unemployed, much less ours. So right now, as a people in America, we are almost becoming obsolete, useless. And when a people are in that kind of condition, where the society cannot use us, we're either too unskilled for the job market, or we don't have sufficient education to produce a job. That's a very dangerous position for black people to be in. Right now, we are 35 to 45% of the armed forces of this country. Now, we don't mind shouldering our share, but when we are only 11% of the population and 35 to 45% of the armed forces, that's very serious. Because when trouble breaks out in Lebanon, it is we who are there. Trouble breaks out in Grenada, it is we who are there. And generally, it is we now who will be called upon to fight our own people in wars in a foreign policy that we have no input into formulating. I think as black people, we need to reconsider ourselves and reconsider our position. I understand that here at this university, last month, which usually is set apart as Black History Month, there was no general celebration by the black students here. Is that correct? You don't have to be timid. It's all right. Is that correct? Now, most white students do not really understand why black students need to reflect on our history. If white students were properly exposed to our history, they would get a healthier concept of us, and it would help them to be able to, I would say, live a little better in this critical hour. Black students need a knowledge of the history of self. Without the history and the knowledge of yourself, brothers and sisters, you don't know what to expect from yourself. If you don't know what you're capable of doing, then you don't know how to drive yourself to get out of yourself what your capabilities are. And the only way you'll know what your capabilities are is that you must be acquainted with your history. History is our guide. If we know what was, then we can see what is. Then we are prepared for what is yet to come. When our fathers were brought to these shores a little over 400 years ago, the slave masters of our fathers wanted to deprive us of the richness of our past. This is the only way you can make a perpetual slave. Keep him blind to himself. I want you to just think with me a moment. The fact that black people in this country have not been privileged to get any knowledge of what happened prior to our fathers coming into bondage here. The fact that we are not familiar with the contributions that we have made to the onward march of civilization means that we don't know now what to expect of ourselves. If you don't know that your fathers built superior civilization, then you will submit yourself to an inferior civilization and be guided by an inferior civilization when in fact, if you had the knowledge of what your fathers built, you could improve and advance civilization as your fathers once did. This kind of brutal robbery of self-knowledge has impaired black people greatly. And so Carter G. Woodson, W.E.B. Du Bois, and others wanted black people to get a profound sense of self from understanding our history. Carter G. Woodson understood that as a tree without roots is dead, so a people without the knowledge of their history is also a dead people. Beloved brothers and sisters, the condition that the lack of the knowledge of self has placed us in is to think inferior. And the scripture teaches us that as a man thinketh, so is he. If I can make you think that you are inferior, then you will act inferior. If I can make you think that you are nothing, then you will be nothing. So our whole life in America, generally speaking, has been victimized by inferior self-feelings. As a result, our actions or lack of self-activity feeds a white supremacy feeling in Caucasian people. Both of these extremes are evil. It is evil for a black human being to think that he is inferior or she is inferior simply because of blackness. And it is equally as sick for a white human being to think they are superior simply because they are white. Both of these extremes lead to sickness, and America is full of this kind of sickness. Therefore, a medicine has to be applied to bring the white man down from that madness, and a medicine has to be applied to bring the black man up. Now, you may ask yourself, well, what kind of medicine is it that needs to be applied to the society? The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that the medicine that needs to be applied is just plain, simple truth. If we had the true knowledge of ourselves and the true knowledge of others, that would do it. Then the responsibility would be on our shoulders to do what is necessary. If we look in the black community, we see people who have just come to this country, got off the boat a few years ago, making success in our community in business. Is that right? You find Hispanic people doing well, Vietnamese, Korean people doing well. They just got here. We've been here longer than most of the whites that are here. Is it that we are inferior, why we are not producing? Or is there something wrong with the quality of knowledge that we've received? Let's reason. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that when our fathers were brought into this country to be made slaves, it was a purposeful design of the slave makers to rob us totally of self-knowledge. This is good for Caucasian people to understand, because oftentimes Caucasians themselves wonder, why don't blacks produce more? Why aren't we more productive? So it is good that each one understand exactly what happened to us. Our situation is certainly not hopeless, it's not impossible, but it is a very serious and critical situation that only understanding and proper knowledge will heal. Now, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us that our fathers were first brought into America not in 1619, as we were told in the history books, but in the year 1555. This is corroborated in the Congressional Library in Washington, that the first slaves were brought into America on a ship named Jesus, captained by one Sir John Hawkins. Now you may wonder why these facts are important. You just stick with it just a few more minutes and it'll become very clear why these facts are very important. From 1555 to 1619, you get 64 hidden years of our history. You notice they used to have a quiz show called the $64 question or the $64,000 question. Yes, have you wondered how they arrived at the number 64? No. Why not 65? Why not 70? 64 represents the 64 hidden years of our history that transformed us from an African black people into a people totally devoid of self-knowledge. Now, what happened during those 64 years? I think it's good to understand, because unless Caucasian people are willing to look at the root of slavery, the tree of slavery will never die. Unless the root is exposed to the light, the tree will never die. Your and my mind as a slave has to die. And their mind as a slave master, that kind of mentality, it has to die. And the only way it can die, expose the root of it to the light of truth. Then let everybody look at it and see it for what it is and judge it properly. Now, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to us that when our fathers were brought to these shores, the slave makers knew that they could never enslave a people who had the knowledge of their own God. There's one thing about knowing God. When you know God, you don't fear men. You can only make a slave when you can make a people fear what they have no right fearing. By Caucasian people causing us to fear them as we ought to fear Almighty God, we did their will, not the will of God. They became the slave master through fear. And that fear still pervades the black community today. Fear to stand up. Fear to speak what you know is the truth. Fear to confront evil and injustice wherever you find it. Fear. And it is fear more than Caucasian people. It is our inordinate fear of them that makes us less than the men and women than God intended for us to be. So in order to remove fear, knowledge has to come. You fear white people, you fear them because you don't have a knowledge of them. When you know them and know yourself, you don't fear them anymore. You fear God alone, then you're free. You make your own path. White folk cannot stop you from being free if you want to be free, if you're not afraid to walk the way of free men. Fear and ignorance are our worst enemies. Okay. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad says to us, and if you read Alex Haley's book, Roots, I'm sure Mr. Haley probably has been to this university, hasn't he? Or has he? You haven't had it? Well, I guess anybody that can really make a difference, you probably won't see. But I'm so glad, brother, you had the strength to bring me here. Now, I really don't think the college should be so upset over the honorarium that you're paying. It's a kind of a racist attitude I'm just going to throw this out for you to think about. You pay your own speakers $5, $7, $10,000. But of course, your speakers are worthy of it. That's what you're saying subtly. Any black speaker that you don't know anything about is not worthy. Look, you know, it's a sort of a racist mentality. You got to know everybody. Still like the old slave plantation. Any slave that's knowledgeable among the slaves, we should know. You'll get to know me in time. Alex Haley, when he was doing the research on the Nation of Islam under the leadership of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in 1962, he was writing for Reader's Digest, and he wrote an article on Elijah Muhammad saying that Elijah Muhammad was the most powerful black man in America. During that time, he questioned Malcolm X and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm said to Alex Haley that many of our first fathers who were brought to these shores were in fact Muslims, believers in the religion of Islam and worshipers of the one God, Allah. Alex Haley just heard it in passing, but it stimulated Mr. Haley, and Mr. Haley began to research his roots. And Haley went back to Africa, to the Gambia, and in 1967, when I became the minister of the powerful New York Mosque after Malcolm's assassination, Alex Haley wrote me a letter and said, Brother Farrakhan, Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad were absolutely correct. I found that my fathers were indeed Muslims. Now, if you know anything about the history of Islam, you will know that from the 7th to the 11th century, the Muslims dominated the known world. Some of your history books calls them Saracen, Mussulman, you know. Most of these powerful warriors and builders of civilization were black people from Africa who had become Muslims after Prophet Muhammad and his followers brought the teachings of Islam into Africa. The Muslims, particularly the black ones, very strong warriors, powerful warriors. So when our fathers were brought into America, in the Caribbean, which was a stop-off, and in Central and South America, you had many Muslims among the slaves. And historically, it was the Muslims who led many of the most successful slave revolts in the Western Hemisphere. Many of the slave revolts in the Caribbean, in South America, being led by Muslims. When our fathers were brought to America, they wanted to make sure that no Muslim was among the slaves. Even though many of the slaves were Muslims, it was their desire and design to get rid of any Muslim among the slaves. Now, this is not accidental, my dear brothers and sisters, that Muslims have been responsible for the greatest surge in consciousness among black people in the Western Hemisphere. One of the greatest teachers from among black people since the beginning of this century was the Honorable Marcus Garvey. And Marcus Garvey was inspired by a Muslim named Deuce Muhammad. You study the history and you will see. Marcus Garvey led the strongest movement of black people ever to come in the Western Hemisphere, over 5 million people under the banner of Marcus Garvey. Another great Muslim teacher was Noble Drew Ali, who started the Moorish science movement, which was very strong in Hartford, Connecticut, New Jersey, Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York on the eastern coast. And it's not an accident that it was a Muslim, Master Farad Muhammad, who taught Elijah Muhammad. And Elijah Muhammad taught Malcolm X. And Malcolm, as an articulator of the ideas of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, became the greatest teacher for black awakening. Will you agree? Yes, sir. Now notice, I'm trying to show you the historical implications of Islam. Now, the slave master wanted no Muslims among us. So the first thing the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that was done was a mating of men and women, whether they were married, family, or not. It didn't make any difference. Forced them to mate with each other. When you force the mating of people who may be members of a family, you have a resistance to that act. So the act itself begins to break down the morals of the people. The children from these acts were separated from the parents, so that the parents could not pass on name, language, culture, religion. It's not an accident that in 1984 we are still walking around with white folks' names on us, though we're supposed to be free. You're not Johnson. You're not Jones. You're not Smith and White and Culpepper and Roundtree and Mr. Fish, Mr. Bunch. Where did you get these names? Can you imagine a black person, Michael O'Hara? These are not your names. The fact that you wear the name of Caucasian people tells us that you were missing your father. Because if you knew your father, you would wear your father's name. If you knew your mother, you would speak your mother tongue. There is no Caucasian person that you can meet in America who is a second or third generation ethnic white from Europe who can't speak some word of their mother tongue. Any Italian person in here can speak a few words of Italian. Any Jewish person in here can speak some words of Yiddish and some Hebrew. They have schools to teach their language. But black people do not speak one word of their own mother tongue. When somebody robs you of your tongue, brother and sister, they rob you of the ability to communicate with your own people. Now that's brutal. That 30 to 40 million of us now don't speak our language, don't wear our names, don't have our culture, don't know our God and our religion. When we are robbed of that kind of basic knowledge, then we cannot look back for guidance. So the only guide we have are the norms and values, folkways and mores of white society. Can you see what I'm saying? Yes, sir. You know, in church we used to sing a song, couldn't hear nobody pray. Mother gone, father gone, the motherless child sees a hard time. 64 years of breaking us down. I mean, it's difficult to look at But I think we ought to look at it, not for the purpose of hatred, but for the purpose of knowledge. Caucasian people, particularly Jewish people, why do you want the world to know and the children to continuously be reminded of the Holocaust? You want them to be reminded of it so that it will never happen again. If we can see what was and know the events that led to that tragic period in the history of the world, and particularly in Jewish history, then maybe today's children, being warned by that history, can make sure that it will never happen again. By black people not knowing what happened to us, brother, we are actually stripped naked in a world of enemies. And we do not know how to make advancement in the world of enemies as long as we don't know how to safeguard ourselves from these tactics and strategies of evil against us as a people. You've got to know what was. And you can't walk around saying, I don't need to know that. Don't tell me that. That's already past. Hush your mouth. You've got to know it. Because you are suffering right now because you don't know. Look at the disunity among us as a people. Do you think this is an accident, beloved? Here we are, 400 years in this country. We know we need unity. You are grossly outnumbered on this campus. The least you could do is be in unity. The least you could do is show some semblance of love and respect for yourself. But you are a microcosm of what is going on all over the country. A lack of unity, a lack of love for self, a lack of self-respect, a lack of respect for our women, a lack of concrete thinking toward future goals that would make us an independent people. This that we are suffering is a direct relationship to those 64 years. Direct relationship. Bear with me. Now, can you imagine male human beings used as a stud horse to breed women? Just think about it for a moment. A woman has to take a man, whether she wants him or not, for the purpose of breeding a little child for slave purposes. The man does not have to take care of the baby. The man just goes into the woman, makes her pregnant, and walks away. For the slave master is going to take care of the child. We suffer from that same madness in 1984. We make our women pregnant, walk away, leave it to white folks to take care of the responsibility. That's gold, brother. You can't get out of that unless the root of how that happened and why that happened is exposed. White folk like to think that black folk are immoral, sex crazy. Why don't you stop that? Why are you going to put on us your own troubles? We were put in this condition. And now the same people that put us in the condition, they're not going to take us out. It has to be someone from among our own people who is concerned about us, who loves us, and who will sacrifice, even at the cost of his or her life, to get the knowledge to us that will break up the results of those 64 hidden years of slavery. Every black leader that has tried to make something of value out of us, what has happened to him? He's been killed. Why? The society has a vested interest in keeping black people in the condition that we're in. During slavery, brothers and sisters, the only way that we could get some reputation, one slave master would have a big, strong, strapping slave, and he would wager with another slave master that my slave can whoop yours. And today, we're still doing the same thing. 1984, beating each other up for the pleasure of others. Whipping each other to the joy of others. During that period of slavery, fear was beaten into the so-called American Negro to such a degree that the babies even nursed the milk of fear from their mother's breasts. Black folk have been through something in this country unlike any people have ever undergone in the annals of human history. To put fear in the slaves, certain slaves were made examples of, killed in a horrible way to make others afraid. Now you may say, well, so what? I mean, that's past. That's still going on right now. You stand up in this society for justice against injustice, somebody's going to threaten your life. That's the fact of life in America. And the only way we'll get around it, we've got to be a strong, united people. And the only way we'll get that kind of unity is if we are rich in the knowledge of self and others. Now, brothers and sisters, can you imagine living in America 300 years being sold? That's difficult to understand. Like you sell any kind of commodity, black people were sold in this country for 300 years. Here's your Constitution, had us as 3/5 of a human being, which meant that white folk was 7/5. They had our 2 plus their 5. So they were superior. We're inferior. And that's the basic law of the country. Don't you realize when that kind of thing is written into the law, that law comes out of the minds of men, that's also written into the attitude of the society? So the society looks upon black people as what? Subhuman. Of course, this is changing. But it will never change except to the degree that you change. How do you look at yourself? White folk are not going to look at you any better than you look at yourself. Once we gain self-respect, others are forced to respect you. Did you know that Caucasians never called our ancient fathers nigger? They were too busy learning from our fathers. We taught the European civilization. All that they have, our fathers gave it to them, brothers and sisters. And this their scholars and scientists know. If they respected your fathers enough to learn from them, because they were worthy of respect by the power of their knowledge, they will also respect you. If you grow into the rich power of knowledge and then use that knowledge to advance yourself and to advance civilization. The burden is not on white people to change their minds about us. The burden is on us to change our minds about ourselves. You got the message? 300 years being sold. Now they said we're free. Beautiful. Can you imagine that? They gave us freedom. Something's wrong already. Because freedom is not white folks to give. All right. You can't give anybody freedom. Freedom is earned through the process of self-development. Did you hear me? Yes, sir. The sperm, when it meets the egg and life is conceived in the darkness of the womb, that life begins to evolve. the womb begins to expand to accommodate this new life. When the 9th month comes around, that baby is fully developed. The womb cannot expand anymore to accommodate the growth, therefore the baby has to come out. No such thing as mama saying, I'm not going to let you out. When it's time to come forth, the baby comes forth. It earns freedom through self-development. Every child in a parent's house earns the right to be free from the parent's domination. That right is earned by developing yourself, becoming mature, becoming responsible. You say to mom and dad, thanks mom, thanks dad, for all that you've done. I think I'll go out now on my own. So when they gave us freedom, then we are not yet truly free because we have not developed to the point where we demand it on our own. See, you can't be free, brother and sister, dependent on another people. That's not freedom. Everybody in America got something of their own. Black folk looking to white people for everything down to toilet paper. That's cold. Now, if you're going to come out of here a few years from now thinking that this world owes you something, and you're going to sit around and wait for this diminishing economy to look after you, I say, brother and sister, you're going to be in for a terrible shock. Because the economy is not going to get any better, it's going to get worse. And the more burdensome we are on the economy, the more genocide becomes a real factor in American society. Now let's move to bring this to a near conclusion. How long have we been in America? From 1555 to 1984 is 429 years. Very significant number. If we've been here 429 years, where in the annals of history do you find a people who have ever been in bondage to another people for 400 years? Nowhere but in America. You pick up your Bible, and when you read about a people called Israel being in bondage to a wicked king named Pharaoh, you are not reading about something that took place thousands of years ago. You're actually reading about your own life. Now, can you imagine, brothers and sisters, that black people in this country have been fulfilling prophecy all along? It was written that we would come into America. Now, this is a very serious part of this lecture, because if America is in prophecy, and she is, and black people are in prophecy, and we are, what do the prophets see for America? And what do the prophets see for you? And since the prophets don't lie, they can't lie, then what is written in your Bible, what is written in the Holy Quran, has to have some bearing on our everyday life and on world affairs. Now, that Bible teaches you in the book of Genesis that God's people, called the seed of Abraham, would go into bondage in a strange land among a strange people for 400 years. They would serve this strange people, and they would be afflicted in that strange land for 400 years. Listen now. But after that time, the scripture says, I will come, God talking, and I will judge that nation which they shall serve. Here you have a nation with a people in it that are being afflicted unjustly. for 400 years. God comes after this people and sets judgment on the nation that his people have served. After 400 years, the book says, God, in his judgment of that nation, would then bring his people out of her, and they will go to their fathers in peace. Now that's a prophecy in the book of Genesis. It is fulfilled when Israel goes into bondage in Egypt. Now I don't know whether you recall when Anwar Sadat went to Jerusalem to make peace with Golda Meir, and Walter Cronkite was interviewing Mr. Sadat at the base of the pyramids. And Mr. Cronkite said, "Isn't it wonderful, Mr. Sadat, that here we are at the base of the pyramids where Mr. Begin's people were enslaved here in Egypt and where they built this pyramid?" Sadat looked at Cronkite and said, "I beg your pardon. We don't have any record of that in our history at all." Now, the oldest history on earth doesn't have any record of any people called Jews being in bondage to a wicked king named Pharaoh for 400 years, and it really did not happen. Then your Bible is talking about you and me and America. Only America is under the symbol Egypt, and we are under the symbolic name Israel. Now let's see if we can prove that this is true. Pharaoh was so afraid. Israel was multiplying very fast. Pharaoh said, "Look, let's deal wisely with them lest they multiply and join on to an enemy of ours and come against us." Have you noticed that there is great concern over the increased population of blacks in this country? And the plan that Pharaoh had advanced was kill the male and spare the female. Do you think it's an accident that our women, brothers and sisters, are so strong, aggressive, intelligent, fighters? They're the real strong ones. Our poor black men are being set upon and destroyed mentally. And if you look in the cities, in the ghettos of America, you find young blacks just being destroyed daily. It is more than just conjecture what you read in the scriptures, brothers and sisters. This is actually the plan. Get rid of the black male, weaken him, so that when the deliverer comes up from among you, you'll be too weak, too cowardly to hear his voice. Look, brother, this is serious. When Martin Luther King began to internationalize the problem, what happened? They said, here's a man that's trying to put the problem of black people on an international level. We can't have that. Martin Luther King assassinated, 39 years old. Malcolm assassinated, 39 years old. Malcolm was about to bring the black people of America's problem to the United Nations as a human rights question to embarrass America before the world because of what America was doing unjustly to black people. Malcolm assassinated. Now, if you look at Reverend Jackson, 5 years ago made a trip to Lebanon to speak to Arafat. What did he do wrong? Why shouldn't he be allowed to speak to other world leaders? Is it because this country and her policy views Arafat and the PLO as terrorists? Is that the reason we shouldn't speak to Arafat? Don't the Irish here speak to members of the Irish Republican Army? Come on. Don't the Irish Catholics here have some concern for the Catholic Protestant war over there in Ireland? Don't you speak to either side? Aren't they guilty of terrorist acts among themselves? Why is it that black people cannot reach out beyond America and have friendship anywhere else without being labeled as something other than what we are? Brothers and sisters, this country fears our unity with third world people. They work hard to keep us separated from our African and Caribbean brothers and sisters. If you have African students on this campus, what is your relationship to the African student? And if there are Caribbean students here, what is your relationship to those students? There's a concerted effort to keep us away from our African brothers and sisters and to keep this divisiveness going. Well, beloved brothers and sisters, after 400 years of this kind of treatment, the resolution of the conflict is in sight. Now, Almighty God has stepped into our affairs. The 400 years for us to serve white folks is up. And for us to continue to want to be their servant after the time given to serve is up. You're going against prophecy, then you're going against that which will make you successful. Every effort that you make and I make today should be to get out of serving others and start helping to serve yourself. In this sense, get out of trying to beg others for a job. Start making a job. Get out of trying to get white folk to educate you. That is our responsibility, to educate our children. They have messed up our children's brains for years. Why not take that responsibility into our own hands? There's nothing wrong with you setting up your own schools. Why should we be the guinea pigs in hospitals across the country simply because we don't set up medical facilities for ourselves? 30 to 40 million people need to have our own hospitals. Don't you think so? You've got an ocean of people in Central America, South America, the Caribbean, Africa, the Isles of the Pacific, ready to do business with you, to trade with you. And here we are, weak at the foot of the nations, as the Bible puts it, like Lazarus at the rich man's gate, begging for the crumbs that fall from the rich man's table. Brothers and sisters, we're going to have to get up and do for ourselves. So in conclusion, after 400 years, the judgment of God is now entered into America. It's not accidental, my dear listeners, that the country is going through this particular period. It's not accidental that the economy is falling. It's not accidental that the leadership of this country is absolutely spiritually blind. It's not accidental that America's foreign policy is getting America deeper and deeper into trouble, and the Reagan administration is, in my humble judgment, leading America straight into the war of Armageddon. To me, it's serious. This kind of leadership that America has been given, since they delighted in taking away from us our leadership, then God gives them leadership that will lead them to hell. Reagan got them going on a roller coaster, brother. If this country does not check itself within the next 2 to 3 years, America will be deep into World War III. That's how serious this thing is. You may laugh, but you won't be laughing in a few days. This is serious. This is very, very serious. And at this crucial period in the history of America, a young black man rises up to say that he wants to be president of the United States of America. Now, brother and sister, that's saying a lot. All of you black students that are here, naturally there are some of you who say, I don't know why Jesse's doing this, because he knows he can't win, and after all, he's just not qualified. Don't put your inferior feelings on brother who doesn't think like you. You are the one that doesn't feel qualified. Evidently, Jesse feels qualified. He's running. What do you have to be? What are the qualifications necessary to run? Just got to be born in America, an American citizen, 35 years of age. I think he fills those qualifications, doesn't he? Well, but he doesn't have any political experience. I see. Neither did George Washington. But he's your first president. Is that right? He distinguished himself at a time when America was in great crisis, in war, and he became the president. Ulysses Grant distinguished himself in a critical period in American history in the Civil War. He became president with no political experience. Dwight D. Eisenhower became president of the United States with no political experience. So don't talk about political experience as being a yardstick to condemn your brother. Evidently, Jesse feels that he knows something about himself that maybe you're not acquainted with in him. Some of us are saying it's an ego trip. He wants to be in the newspaper. Well, I certainly will appreciate the fact that he's been on the cover of Newsweek and Time, but a man wants to be around. He wants to be alive to read the clippings. Do you realize that when Hank Aaron was closing in on Babe Ruth's home run record, his life was threatened? The young lady, Vanessa Williams, I think her name is, who has become Miss America, here's a black woman, become Miss America, her life is threatened. Because some sick mind feels that a black woman has no right being a standard of beauty in white American society. Now, when a black person runs for president of the United States, do you realize that there are forces in this country who really don't want that to happen? Not that they're afraid that he might win. The fact that he runs is dangerous. Why is his running dangerous? I was one of the first young blacks to be on national television back in 1945 or 6, I believe, on the Ted Mack Original Amateur Hour. I was a violinist, and during the rehearsal that day in New York, the man asked me, "What would you like to be when you grow up?" I said, "I would like to play the violin as great as Jascha Heifetz." Now, to any of you who know anything about music, of course, there are many fine violinists today, but Jascha Heifetz, in my judgment, was one of the greatest that ever played the violin. For a young black child to aspire to equal the finest that the world had offered, that was too much. Did you know they changed those lines? Listen to what they said. I was also a track star. So when the question came up in the actual performance, what do you want to do when you grow up? I hope I'll be able to play as fast as I can run. Now that's not threatening. You see, that's not threatening to white supremacy, because we are supposed to be able to run fast. Now, if television has guarded the minds of blacks so that a proper idea wouldn't get into your mind to make you aspire to greater things, how much is Jesse's running for the presidency affecting the minds of young blacks? Whether you know it or not, he's already won. If he never wins, he's already won, because by running, he's freed every one of your minds to think on the highest level possible. If the highest that you can be in America is the President of the United States, and this man had the nerve to run for that office, then you as young black students know now that you can be more than a singer, a dancer, a football player, a track star, basketball player, but you can be a thinker, a planner, a formulator, a theoretician, a tactician, a strategist, a statesman. That's free in your mind. When Jesse sits down to debate the questions of our time, he holds his own with the best of them. He's brilliant, sharp. His wit, his comeback is right on it. Anytime you sit around and see little children calling their mothers out of the kitchen to come and watch Jesse debate, the children are inspired by Reverend Jackson's candidacy. I was with the brother in Syria, and I know that Reverend Jackson is presidential material. I watched him up close. I saw how he handled the foreign minister of Syria, how he handled the religious leaders of Syria, how he handled the president of Syria. His persuasive logic, his ability to reason, his having developed a friendship with those leaders in that part of the world gave him an edge on the government of America. Reagan doesn't speak to Assad, but Jesse did. Reagan doesn't speak generally to the leaders in that area, but Jesse has spoken to all of the leaders in that area. He would have spoken to Begin, but Begin slighted him. How can America, in this kind of a world, exist intelligently without the leader of this country dialoguing with the leaders of the world? It's insane. America has a Eurocentric foreign policy. It is as though the only people in the world are white and European. Here, 2 billion people on earth are Asians. 1 billion are Chinese. And for nearly 30 years, America had this sick, crazy policy of not recognizing 1 billion human beings simply because they were communists. Absolutely silly. 1/8 of the world's population is African. And America's foreign policy toward Africa is atrocious. America's involvement in South Africa is immoral. How in the world could we vote for Mondale or Gary Hart or Glenn unless they said to us what their policy would be toward Africa? Don't you see, beloved, we've got to become more politically aware, more economically aware? What president can become president without going to the Jewish community and stating his policy toward Israel? The Jewish people would not stand for it. And here they are, 6 million, and you are nearly 40 million. And you will not demand from the white candidates, what is your African policy? What is your Caribbean policy? And what is your domestic policy with respect to justice for black people? We're not asking for any different treatment. All we want is justice in the society. Well, Jesse is actually uncovering the wickedness of America's foreign policy. I was with Jesse a few weeks ago at the UN. He spoke to all of the African ambassadors. When he came out of that meeting, which was a closed meeting to the press were lined up almost enough to fill maybe to half of this middle section. Just press, press, press. They asked Jesse, what did you say to the African ambassadors? Jesse told them, and not one line of it was printed in the paper. Do you know why? Because if it had been printed, Mondale would have had to answer the question, what is your African policy? Glenn would have had to answer the question, what is your African policy? And because they did not want to be embarrassed on that, I'm telling you, news in this country is managed. Listen. The American public thinks they are informed, but the American public is actually being manipulated. And I warn you, you know, the American people, when they wake up, they are going to rise up. Yes, right. Yes. And it's not going to be a pretty thing to see. Jesse Jackson comes up in the 429th year of our sojourn in America. Do you know how long the children of Israel stayed in Egypt? The scripture says 430 years. Jesse represents Exodus. Now, does that mean you're going to leave America? No. It means you're going to leave out from under the control of a value system that is not your own. And any one of you black students who can vote for Jesse, feeling in your heart, I'm not just voting for him because he's black. I'm voting for him because he makes sense. If you can vote for your brother on that base, you've already made a portion of the Exodus, for you have come out from under this debilitating inferiority complex. You now see that a black man is qualified to rule. If a Caucasian person can look at Jesse Jackson and say, he makes sense, I can vote for him, that Caucasian has also made an exodus. For the Bible says it was a mixed multitude that went out. White folk are making an exodus out of that sick mentality of white supremacy, that only white people should rule. Blacks cannot rule. Sorry about that. It's a new day. We will rule if we're qualified to rule. And if we are qualified to rule, there is nothing that can keep us from ruling. We have submitted to white rule for 400 years, and there have been some good aspects of it. But with Reverend Jackson, we see a chance now to help America out of her insanity. Sure enough. Believe me, brothers and sisters, Jesse is so on the issues. I must say to our Jewish friends that may be in the audience, you know, when Jesse made this unfortunate remark, Jaime, that was spread all over the country and all over the world. Jesse was made to look like, in private, he slurs a people. Isn't that the way it was made to look? Let me ask a question. If Jaime is a racial slur, why do Jews name themselves Jaime? Since we didn't name you that. You cannot go into a Jewish section of town without seeing Jaime's Delicatessen, Jaime's Donut Shop, Jaime's this. Jaime, that's true. Now, is Jaime a bad name? You can't tell me that, because Jewish people are too intelligent to give themselves bad names. They are some of the wisest people on the earth. They know what the value of a good name is. And if you take the name Jaime and take it to its root in Hebrew, what does it mean? The Hebrew root, according to what some rabbis have told me, is Hyman. Hyman means life. Hyman in Hebrew, then Hyman, and the endearing term Jaime. Dottie, Johnny, Lovey, Sweetie, Jaime. That's not a racial slur. Now look, if there are Irish people in this house tonight, you know that Irish, though you are European and Italians are European extraction, you have a community in which you live together. People like to be among their own. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, if there's a popular name among Irish, Callahan, just say. If I say, I'm going over to Callahan City, what am I saying? I'm going to that part of town where the Irish hold sway. If Ivan is a popular Russian name, Hans and Fritz are popular German names. If I say I'm going to Hanstown or Fritztown or Ivantown, I'm saying I'm going where the Germans or the Russians hold sway. Jesse Jackson never mentioned that in the pejorative sense. His mistake was, in my humble judgment, not owning up to it immediately and making mockery of those who wanted to make it such a wicked term. But he recognized that he has been on the skids with Jews for the last 5 years. And that kind of terminology, wrongly interpreted, wrongly taken, would only exacerbate the differences between Jesse and the Jewish community. So he would not lie and say, no, I didn't say it. He said, I don't recall. So he wrestles with himself and he makes an admission. Now, all over the country, everywhere he goes now, this word Jaime is thrown up in his face. Last Sunday morning, 3 a.m. in the morning, the Jewish Defense League firebombed his Los Angeles campaign headquarters. And in another campaign headquarters, they threw red paint over the headquarters. 2 members of the Jewish Defense League have been arrested for that crime. You didn't hear about that in the news. How come? How come Jaime is more important than the bombing of Jesse Jackson's campaign headquarters? These are Jewish terrorists that are being protected by so-called responsible Jewish people. Now, brothers and sisters, I'm saying this to all of you We are tired of feeding black people to America like a giant Jaws, that every time black folk get a leader that white folk don't like, our leaders are killed and nothing is done or said about it. We don't ever intend for that to happen again. We are like you all. You all are intelligent. You say, remember the Alamo? Remember Pearl Harbor? You don't want it to happen again. Remember the Holocaust? You don't want it to happen again. If you disagree with Jesse Jackson, fine. Vote him out at the polls. That's the intelligent thing to do. But to kill him because he's a strong black man who gives these young black boys and young men a strong male image, to kill him because he means something to black people, you're playing with a dangerous fire. It's very serious, brothers and sisters, because the black man is no longer forsaken. I said in the beginning that after 400 years, God said he would judge the nation that we will serve. Right now, America is under judgment. Jesse Jackson is not just no common brother that just stood up. He's an instrument that God is using for the liberation of his people, and also actually grace for white folk. He really is grace. Even if he never wins, if he can help Mondale to see the folly of a foreign policy that exacerbates the tensions in the world, if he can help Glenn and Hart to see, look, if the people in Nicaragua want a communist government, leave them alone. Must you go and destabilize and destroy every government on earth that doesn't have your way of life? Who in the hell do we think we are that everybody got to think like us or they're not worth? No. I heard it said that America will not permit communism in Mexico. What are you going to do? If American democracy is so great, you can compete against communism. If this is the best system in the world, what are you afraid of? You don't want to talk to Cuba, but you want to talk to Russia. Silly. Russia 10,000 miles away, Cuba 90 miles from your shore. You want relationships with Russia, but you don't want relationships with her surrogate. It's not good thinking. Grenada. I mean, to just watch the lies that Reagan told. Whole naked lie. They called us in. A 2,000 troop army in Grenada, 2,000, with no Navy, no Air Force, and all the other little islands which America has complete domination over. America asked them to ask America in as the justification for getting rid of the regime in Grenada. Plain and simple, justifying her wicked actions by using her little silly surrogates in the Caribbean. Brother and sister, these things get America in serious trouble. Because it doesn't make friends for America, it increases the hatred for the country around the world. It's a foolish, senseless policy. I think Mr. Reagan, myself, are very friendly with John Wayne, and I just feel that he has throwbacks, to the old. I'm not making mockery of him. He's a brilliant. They called us in. a 2,000 troop army in Grenada, 2,000, with no navy, no air force, and all the other little islands which America has complete domination over. America asked them to ask America in as the justification for getting rid of the regime in Grenada. Plain and simple, justifying her wicked actions by using her little silly surrogates in the Caribbean. Brother and sister, these things get America in serious trouble. Because it doesn't make friends for America, it increases the hatred for the country around the world. It's a foolish, senseless policy. I think Mr. Reagan, myself, are very friendly with John Wayne, and I just feel that he has throwbacks, to the old. I'm not making mockery of him. He's a brilliant man. But he wants to make America what America once was, and you can't do it in the context of today's world. America has to learn to get along with the people in the world. Everybody doesn't think like America. If you love democracy, you make democracy work. You make democracy that which it is supposed to be, and no communist anywhere on the earth will be able to withstand the beauty of your democracy unless your democracy is a farce. If you are lying to yourself, then you have to have armies overthrow communist countries. But if you really make America a democracy, you don't have anything to fear. You don't have anything to fear. This is one of the finest systems of government anywhere to be found on the earth. It's just been run for the advantage of the rich. I think America is under judgment. And black folk, you have a big future. Little advice. Here at this university, I would hope that you would settle down and dig into your studies. Don't party so much, because the time is late. We need as much engineering as we can get. It's all right to be in liberal arts. That's fine. But those who build civilization are those who are proficient in mathematics and in the sciences. We must become proficient in mathematics, in all of the sciences, and in all of the branches of engineering. We must become proficient in history. We must master the principles of history, because human beings consistently repeat history because they arrogantly think that they can beat it. And you can't beat history unless you know it. We must become proficient in language other than English. We must master the English language, because it's the only language we have now. And we must become proficient in this language, because this is the language that the ideas are conveyed that warped our minds, and this is the language that the ideas can be conveyed to straighten out our minds. But we need to get into Spanish. You must become proficient in Spanish. You have all of these people of yours and mine around the rim of America. You and I must communicate with them. Spanish, French. Why Spanish and French? They're European languages. Unfortunately, if you go to Africa right now, if you learn a tribal language, you might not be able to communicate with another African brother or sister whose tribal language is different. But since the French have colonized there, then if you learn French, you can speak generally to most of the people on the African continent. French, English, and Arabic, you can pretty much reach all of Africa. We must master language. We must think in terms of the dynamics of international relations and branch out from thinking so small that you are just 30 million black people in America. You are a part of an ocean of black people all over the world, and you and I have to begin reaching our hands out of friendship. Actually, brothers and sisters, black people in this country are a blessing to America if America would wake up and see it. And if you would wake up and be yourself. So from this point on, I say in conclusion, don't think in terms of begging others for a job. Let's think in terms of creating them for ourselves. Don't leave here thinking in terms of just little jobs with social agencies. Please. You get out of here with the knowledge of sociology and reconstruct your own society among our people. Don't reach out for white people for brotherhood before you reach out for brotherhood among yourselves. Charity begins at home. If you learn to love each other and come into unity with each other, then the mutual respect between us and Caucasian people will automatically develop. But if we are not self-respecting, no one will respect us. Brothers, don't mistreat your women. Any nation that is going to be respected must respect its woman. I'm so sad to see what America is doing to the women. It's a shame to see young white girls on television selling soap, but not really selling soap. Do you understand what I'm saying? When you strip a woman down and put her on television telling people, fly me, I'm Ellen, you are degrading her humanity. And you are making that woman a commodity rather than a human entity. And I think all women should resent being made a commodity. All women should resent being looked at by her measurements. Anytime you have to tell people I'm 36, 23, 38, in order for people to respect you as something really worthwhile, you got to be stacked. You got to be cracked. You know, this is where a woman should be measured. Her intelligence, her character. There's so much that America has to grow up into, you know? Outgrow this foolishness of white supremacy. We cannot deny that white people have been superior. There's no question about that. But you are not superior because you are superior. You are superior because the darker peoples of the world have been asleep. Now that's a big difference. You see? You call the Chinese sleeping giants. You call Africa a sleeping giant. The black man in America is not even considered sleep. He's considered dead. So anybody can look superior when somebody's sleeping. Your children look superior to the parents when the parents are asleep. But now when we wake up, there's a different story. China has just been awake now 30 or more years. Few days, China's gone. Japan, look at her. America trounced her in World War II, but look at Japan now. She's moving, outstripping America economically. Well, I guess we can see the diminishing returns of this kind of philosophical outlook on life. I would hope that those of you who heard what we said tonight about the roots of our condition would recognize the value of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and how he attacked that condition. Brilliant man. He first had to make us love black. Not because we are black supremacists, but in this society we were made to think that black is ugly, shameful, bad. Is that right? So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad just put something out there that stops your cold. He said the black man is the original man. You can't argue with that. It is mathematically, biologically, genetically, physiologically impossible for two whites to produce yellow, much less black. So what Elijah Muhammad was saying, don't keep patting yourself on the back so much now. Remember, the original man is where you had your roots. Now, there are some whites who would rather say their roots were in apes than to say that their roots came from the original black man of the earth. But it's a fact. We are your roots. That doesn't make us superior unless we act in a superior manner. Nor does it make you superior because we went to sleep in order to allow you to rule. Now it's wake-up time for you and for us. If we can't live together in peace, then the judgment comes, separation comes, and destruction comes. What do you want? What do you want? If Jesse is killed, what do you think the reaction of blacks will be? What do you think black folk will do? They'll do something. I want you to be aware of what God will do. But if you recognize that our people are highly emotional and very volatile, something happens to Jesse, you know the police are ready to handle any situation that comes up. They've been well stocked with the most deadly weapons you could think of. So you know if blacks rise up and do any burning or anything like that, our people are going to be killed wholesale. And to kill us wholesale, which is going to be a vicious put down of any rebellion, it will drive the races further apart. And then all those soldiers that you have that are black in Germany and elsewhere around this country, how will they fight for America when they see their brothers, their sisters, their family members shot down in the street and a leader from among themselves killed because he advocated the kind of ideals that they joined the army to fight for? Americans, among the poor and the oppressed and among women, then any assassination on Jesse Jackson or of Jesse Jackson will affect more than black people. It could foment revolution. How can America fight war on the outside and revolution on the inside? For God's sake, think. Think. Already there are over 100 real threats on Jesse Jackson's life. 100 real threats on this brother's life, and over 10 people, Caucasian, are arrested for paraphernalia and whatnot that says that they were going to attempt to assassinate this brother. That is dangerous. I say this to all of you. Think sanely, will you? Brothers and sisters, pull yourself together. Pull yourself up. Get your life in order. Plan for the liberation of your people. May God bless you all as I greet you in peace. Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to have a fast question. Thank you. Brothers and sisters, if there are some of you who would like to ask a question, I will do my best to try and answer them for you. If you have about 10 more minutes. Would you like to ask a question? Yes, sir.
I'm not from this country, I'm from Iran. But being here tonight, I have felt terrible just to be lighter than everybody else in here perhaps. Because to me it seems, sir, that you don't like white people in general, and it seems that all the white people are out there to get black people. What is the difference? Because I never knew it before I got to this country, that black and white were two different things as far as a human being is concerned.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me what the difference is?
Sir, with all due respect, if that's your perception of my lecture tonight, your perception, which of course is your perception, but I don't share that perception. I'm not hateful or angry with all white people. You are from Iran. You have not lived under the kind of oppression that black people have lived under in America. You lived under the oppression of the Shah. And if you could see the justification for the removal of the Shah because of an oppressive regime, what we are saying is that we want oppression in this country to black people to end. And I'm sure as an Iranian student, you know what you have suffered already with the propaganda that has been spread in this country about Iran and about the revolution and about Khomeini and others. You have suffered by being an Iranian. When people hear that you are from Iran, immediately they identify you with a person that is an object of scorn and hate. It is this kind of mismanagement of news, mismanagement of truth, that creates hatred where none should exist. What I want these young white students here to see is what has happened to black people in this country as a result of slavery, and that these young blacks have not overturned the effect of slavery yet. I want young whites to understand what their fathers did so that the sons or the children might intelligently show more understanding, if not compassion, for these who are the children of slaves who have yet to conquer what has happened to us and our fathers. It does not mean to imply any hatred. I am a Muslim. And as a Muslim, you know we have white Muslims all over the world. And we embrace and hug and kiss each other because our religion does not permit us to knock each other down because of our color. You see? So America has a lot of growing up to do. And I hope that you didn't get that impression that if you're white, that's a terrible thing to be. No, it's not true.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. How long have you been in this country?
About 7 years.
7 years. Then you were here before the revolution, right? Are you Muslim?
Yes, I am.
Shia. Yes. Well, brother, may Allah bless you, and all of us as Muslims, we have a great responsibility. Islam, as you know, is such a powerful faith. It takes human beings who are diverse and makes them to see their oneness in Allah. if we can get Americans to transcend the diversities through the teachings of Islam, America can be saved from the road that she's on. If she cannot and continues in this kind of mentality, this mentality will lead America to self-destruction. I saw someone's hand over here. Ma'am.
What do you think that the students here at Eastern can do to bring unity among ourselves? Because we seem to have a problem with that.
Yes, her question, what do you think the students at Eastern should do to bring about more unity? I think the first thing we should do is stop talking to each other. You know, we have always wanted to dialogue with Caucasian people because we felt that through dialogue we can build bridges of understanding. But oftentimes we don't dialogue with each other. I have spent the last few years of my life going among Christians, going to different organizations, different persuasions, breaking down barriers. And now, thanks to Allah, I speak as much in Christian churches as I do in Muslim mosques. But it didn't start by staying away from each other. It starts by talking to each other, getting to know each other. This is another reason why I thank Allah for the candidacy of Reverend Jesse Jackson, because Jesse Jackson's candidacy has allowed black people of different views, Catholic, Baptist, Church of God in Christ, Muslims, agnostics, socialists, Pan-Africanists, nationalists, to sit down and work together. And you know, when you start talking with one another, you begin to find out how close you really are to each other if you give yourself a chance. So why not just start talking to each other? When you walk out tonight, there's some brother and sister here that you've seen, but you've never taken the time to say, hi, how are you? Well, walk right up. We're not going to bite each other. Walk right up and say, hello, my name is Cindy, and so and so and so. And the more you start talking to each other, strengthening the bond of your love and unity, others will begin reflecting that. One last point on that. You know, as black people, we always talk about how Caucasian police kill blacks in the black community, right? Do you know that the Caucasian police do not kill us as much as we kill each other? Now, brothers and sisters, don't you see that if we stop doing these things to ourselves, we force them to stop doing it to us? I mean, really, 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 the burden is on you and me. Break down these barriers. Start talking to each other. Do you have any fraternities on this campus? Sororities? You really don't need any, because you're all belonging to the same fraternity anyway. Fraternity of oppressed people. You don't really have too much of anything here. Is it really kind of burdensome on you here? You hardly even party. Boy, this is really someplace. I gotta mark this place down on my book. What is going on here? Yes, my brother.
I think Councilor Williams, as Black Betrayal was first identified job. Comment on that first, and then comment on the support of some of the other black leaders of Jesse Jackson's candidacy.
Oh, I'm so glad you raised this question. It has been commented, he says, by Chancellor Williams, who is one of our most profound historians, brothers and sisters. He's not very popular because he's so great for us. And you should all read Chancellor Williams' book. In his book, brother says, he said that the betrayal first starts among ourselves. Is that correct? Well, that's a principle. The person that can do you the worst harm are those who are the closest to you. Therefore, the Bible says that they of a man's own household will be his worst enemy. The Quran teaches us to guard against the internal enemy. In the Quran, the hypocrites of Muhammad were his worst enemies. And the hypocrites were his worst enemies because they appeared to be Muslims, but in reality, they were working for an outside force. Jesus had 12 disciples, and he said, "Have not I chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil?" Now with the betrayal, Marcus Garvey was betrayed from within. Every black movement that fell was betrayed from within. The fact that Jesse had to be crucified over the term hymen was because of a betrayal by a black reporter from the Washington Post. And I intend to suggest that this reporter be dealt with by the black community. I intend to suggest that all those who are traitors to our cause be dealt with by us. I am saying to all politicians and preachers and leaders, if you can't put your life on the line for your people, then get out from in front of them. Jesus said, "The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." Black leaders should be accountable to black people. And if they mess up, they should be punished. That's the way traitors have always been dealt with in any society. We need to deal with our own the same way. So I hope to suggest that this man, Milton Coleman, be ostracized by us, that he not be allowed to come among us. Wherever we see him, we turn him out. Keep him away from us. That's a mild form of punishment. But in the future, it will be penalized by death. In the future, our traitors will be killed just like the traitors of every nation. You must make examples of these kinds of wicked, handkerchief-head, Uncle Tom, knee-bending, foot-shuffling, back-scratching people. They are unfit to be recognized among us. They're just unfit. Yes, brother. This is the time that you should look for them. You know, it was something to see when the Panther Party went on trial. Many of the Panthers that were talking against Panthers were agents of the United States government sent in to disrupt the Panther Party. Right now, there are 2 Muslims who have spent nearly 20 years in prison for the murder of Malcolm X, and they are absolutely innocent. One brother that admitted he was a part of it later told the authorities who was involved, and the authorities will not open up the case and give those 2 brothers a new trial. Those young men have been on all kinds of television shows. They have one television show that's called Lie Detector. The brother passed with flying colors. He's innocent. But the government refuses to open up the case because the government itself is responsible. They have sent agents in among us posing as Muslims. And if they bring the case out in the open, they're going to have to expose their own operatives who were operating among Muslims, calling themselves Muslims. This is a sick, sick thing. This happened all throughout the 60s. The government would send black men, black women into black organizations to ferment trouble, to even get us to fighting and killing each other. Then they would back out. Agents of the government. I tell you, this is dangerous. In 1980s, these kind of agents will be killed outright. I don't mind saying this, you know, any government agent is in here. You better think twice. I don't mind you watching us. That's all right. You should watch any group that you think is a problem. Watch us. Tap our phone if you want to. But don't put brother against brother, make brother kill brother, and think that the government is going to protect you from us. No. That may sound a little radical, doesn't it? Sound a little radical to you? Sure it is. Sure it's radical. But how else are you going to stop this foolishness? Many young blacks were shot to death because of that Judas factor. Agents, people not doing anything against the government, but the government did not want the Panther Party to exist. Strong young black men toting a little rifle. Now what could their little rifles do against the armed might of America? Please. This country is so powerful in her weaponry. She can sell you your little pop guns and shotguns. You will not harm her with your little action. She knows this. But this betrayal has to stop. And those who betray the cause of liberation for our people, when liberation is achieved, these kinds of men and women will be tried and sentenced to death, and their sentence will be carried out. That's what happened in Cuba. That's what happened in China. I think that's what happened here in America. Did Benedict Arnold make it? Did he make it? I don't think he did. Nobody loves a traitor. One of the strongest Caucasian men that we've seen in recent years on television is that young man that worked for the Nixon administration, E. Howard Hunt. Strong, dedicated, committed American. Almost some people think he's insane. But he's admired by those who are patriots. But he had no feeling whatsoever for Dean. He could eat Dean alive for supper, spit him out and eat him up again for breakfast. He hates turncoats. That's the kind of spirit that is needed among us if we're going to be successful. We just hate those kind of persons who betray us. May Allah bless you, brother. Thank you for your question. The sister right behind you.
About diversity fraternities, and we're from the University of Connecticut. It's a group of us. Everyone here is not the beat. And on our campus, we do have organizations, and we do have just a little bit more unity on our campus. And I just want to know, do you have any pros and cons? Because they're not all that bad, and it is one way to get or to...
No, I don't have any negative against fraternities at all. I think it's a good thing to help teach and instruct us in the basic principles of brotherhood. I just don't think we ought to take it to an extreme. I don't think we ought to say because I'm an AKA or an Alpha or I am a Delta or an Omega or a Sigma, that because I'm in one fraternity and you're in another, I'm in one sorority and you're in another, that we shouldn't have a strong relationship with each other. After all, Alpha beta, gamma, delta are just letters in the Greek alphabet. And no letter is sufficient to itself. You have to put letters together to make words. You have to put words together to make sentences. You have to put sentences together to make a paragraph, and you have to put paragraphs together to tell our story. So, brothers and sisters, let's not get carried away with fraternities and let them be a means of more divisiveness, but use them to teach the principles of brotherhood and sisterhood. Okay? Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
What do you recommend that small universities like this do where minorities are so few that we do to try to persuade administrative faculty to at least have one Black studies course semester instead of every other semester?
Well, what you must understand, my sister, is that these predominantly white campuses, they're not set up to accommodate black needs or wants. And when we press them to try to satisfy our needs and wants, you notice a great recalcitrance on the part of administrations. Black studies will further us into the knowledge of ourselves, hopefully, but they don't necessarily feel that that's important for this campus. It may be important to you, but it's not important for them. So how do you go to a predominantly white school and get the best out of that school since you are not able to make the school bend to your wishes? Now, this brother raised the question out of Chancellor Williams' book. Is that the destruction of African civilization? Now, if you really want to become proficient in black studies, you almost have to do that on your own. You must take time out of your own schedule to feed your mind the things that strengthen you in the love of yourself. And don't rely on the college that you have become a part of to give you all of your needs and your wants. They're just not constructed like that. You must get those things on your own. If I were a student here at Easton, if I were a student at the University of Connecticut, I personally wouldn't make any demands on the administration to give me black studies. Because I know when they give it to me, they give it to me in a way that it won't mean too much to me anyway. I'd rather give it to myself. I've been a student of our history now for 30 years. And I'm constantly studying, that which will edify me and help me to edify others. I don't think I need to make that demand on a white institution. There are things here that I can get, and I will get what I came for and leave what I don't want. And when I leave, go out and make a contribution first to my people. But I tell you, it just makes a lot of tension. We want them to teach black studies, and they looking at you like you're crazy. So every other semester they give it to you? I think that's pretty good. But if you really want some black studies, I understand there are only 75 of us here. Why don't you have study groups on this campus once a week where you sit around and discuss Chancellor Williams, discuss some of our great black authors? Don't you know you would come out of those study sessions so fired up that you'll go to your class the next day and you won't even think any inferior thought that because there's no black studies here, I'm not getting what I want. Mathematics don't have any color to it. Grab a hold to the mathematics. Get the physics, get the chemistry, get the sciences, And black studies only is to give you a mind to use what you know for the advancement of your people. I hope I haven't disappointed you with that answer. But I just wouldn't fight them to try and make a white college black. I do think this. Each of us do something strong economically, set up your own college. You got to serve your own needs. This is what it's all about. When you got your own, that's when they'll respect you. I guarantee you, if we set up our own college and taught that, I bet you the first thing they would offer is black studies, and they'd try to offer it better than you were offering it in your own college. God bless the child that's got his own. I saw this gentleman here. This will be the last question.
You're a minister and everything. Is there any hope for blacks and whites to live together peacefully and for a common cause in America? Rise together?
Well, I would say this. Where there is life, there is hope. Where there is life, there is hope. As a young white student, and this generation of whites who are inheriting a world that's pretty messed up, you see that the world cannot go on as it is if you would take it upon yourself to do justice in your own life to others and encourage others to do that. There'll be more than hope. But we don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of time. Whatever you're going to do of good, do it. We don't have a lot of time. But there is some hope. But it's very faint. Because those few whites that would want to give some justice to oppressed people, they have so many of their own brothers and sisters who will hurt them even for thinking of some just way to end the conflict between the races. It's not accidental that John Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln were shot down. People don't like you if you appear to be, if you pardon the expression, a nigger lover. Ain't nobody asking you to be that. We're not asking Caucasians to love us. We're asking Caucasians to have enough self-interest that you see that it is not in your self-interest to continue to exacerbate tensions between the races. It's just not intelligent. It's just not an intelligent thing to do. If you turn from that course, there's hope. But in the meantime, as black people, we cannot wait on whites to change. We must get busy and change ourselves. Clear? So I'm so thankful. I want to say to you, this has been a very subdued evening for me. I've been under the flu, and I got out of the hospital last night and spoke twice and flew from Alabama up here. And I'm not in the best of health, but I'm grateful that you were gracious enough to make my evening light. I thank you for your kind attention. I thank you for your patience. And I hope and pray for the success of our black students in doing something for self, and for the white students in maturing out of a white supremacist attitude. May God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.